and I met a tall black figure. And this figure had a hornet skull for a head. It looked like a deer, but I think it was closer to an elk. And anyway, this figure was sat towering on a throne. And all of a sudden, I recognized him. And I stayed very calm, and he spoke to me. His words only to ask me, what were you expecting? And before I even, conceptualized what I was going to answer, I had already replied, no throne. And so this figure actually stood up, came to me, embraced me, and he had very, very long fingers. And as the embrace drew to a close and his fingers and arms clasped around my body, I just woke up. And so that's how I met the man in black.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. Today we welcome Briar of the Green Chapel. Briar is a traditional witch, cunning woman, and fairy doctor. Her work is invested in the sorceress duality of healing and harming, and in furthering her relationship with the hidden by cultivating and deepening meaningful bonds with gods and ungods alike, and exploring one's own soul and psyche as other. With a scholarly background in comparative art and literature, Brier is a French native born and raised in the mountains and now currently living and working in the UK and being taught by the land here. In the show, we discuss how geographical boundaries overlap, or in some cases don't overlap, in the spirit world, and how language itself can be a portal. Briar takes us through her initiation and her meeting with the Dark Man. It's an absolutely fascinating account. And towards the tail end of the show, Briar takes us through her thoughts on Joan of Arc and the overlap with fairy lore. Really is a remarkable account and one I think you're going to get a lot from. In the Plus show, we also get into how the land where your magic happens may not necessarily be the land of your birth, or ancestral land even. We discuss the tour, Glastonbury tour that is, and the Green Chapel of Briars namesake. To close out, we discuss the ordeal of initiation further, and her relationship with the Goddess Bridget. Wonderful chat, and I think you're going to enjoy it. Now, if you want to hear the Plus show, simple way to do it is to come and join the Patreon. You'll get that Plus show and all the back catalogue, as well as Plus shows, and you get everything in advance. So if that sounds like your bag, then come and join the fam. Now, just a quick shout out, Merrily Duffy has a show on YouTube and a podcast called Casual Temple. Really has some great guests and some really interesting conversations there. So if you're looking for something to listen to, do check out Merrily Duffy's Casual Temple. It's a really good show. Okay, let's get on with the show. Okay, so it is my great pleasure to welcome Briar to the Spirit Box. Briar, you're most welcome. Really nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here too.
Wonderful. Well, we've been organizing this for a while now. We exchanged some messages on Instagram, so it's really nice to have you on the show.
Correct. You're the first person who ever wanted to invite me on a podcast, and I'm grateful for it. So thanks for having me.
Oh, wonderful. Well, one of the reasons I asked you to come on the show, if you'd be interested in come on the show, was really just some really interesting pieces that you shared on your Instagram that I thought were really insightful. And you had this wonderful kind of juxtaposition with French tradition, French folklore, and a really kind of working knowledge of Irish folklore and Irish traditions, and that immediately was a very attractive to me as an area to explore. So I'm delighted to have you on the show. but to kind of orientate people and to introduce to people who may not be as familiar with your work and your practice, could you tell us a bit about yourself and kind of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure, sure. I mean, I'm never very much good at introducing myself, and I always feel like it's an exercise I suck at, to be honest. But I mean, I guess I'm an animist. I'm a spirit walker, and I'm also a traditional witch and arguably a cunning woman because I practice a particularly specific branch of cunning craft called fairy doctoring, which I was initiated into by an Irish mentor. But you're right. I'm actually a French native. You can tell by the terrible accent. Uh, I was born and raised in the Alps, baptized by the cold waters of mountain lakes, and I'm now currently living and working in the UK. So, being taught by the land here, you're right. I'm at a bit of a crossroads of different traditions, which I try to encompass and bring together in a way that I can articulate and that makes sense for me. And I recognize that I'm also very much a guest in some of those traditions
Hmm.
because, as far as I know, I do not have Irish ancestry. I do not claim to have any, you know, connection to Ireland, save for the tradition I was initiated into.
Sure.
So it's not lost on me that it may be odd to claim to be a fairy doctor when actually, you know what, I was born in a completely different land. But throughout my, I would say, probably devotional and religious allegiances, I found a lot of connections here, which I've been really interested to explore. And slowly but surely, a path, started to appear and make sense to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And c'est un accent magnifique, hein? You know?
You're saying that correctly.
Je parle bon de français, pas beaucoup, mais on peut. Um,
Ça fait trop plaisir.
just to just to kind of pull the thread on that bit around I guess ancestral connection to Ireland. I always think I really understand why people are keen to address that and put that up front, but it's a question I'm interested in exploring. Is that do do the spirits care? Do the gods care if the connection is there? If they're making the connection, so I think it's something that we can labor on the human side a bit
Yes,
more.
I would very much agree with you. I've for a long time I actually had, a big imposter syndrome regarding that, and that's a question I've brought to my mentor over and over again. And they have kept saying that Irishness, to begin with, is not a thing, and to market it as something that would be a bit more, that would grant me more legitimacy would be something really odd. They were of the opinion that a sincere, an open heart and a sincere desire to learn and a capacity to learn and beside the willingness to learn, a call to learn was more important. So it's um, it's also tied to, I guess, the history of the country because living in the UK, you you get to witness a few things and a few bits and bobs that are not too comfortable as to how the country has been treated by its peers in Europe. So I guess I just wanted to be mindful of all that, realizing that I come from two countries that are, that have a colonialist and imperialism past, I suppose. So yeah, it's linked to all that. But you're right. Do the spirits care? I think to an extent they do, but they care much more about what's in your heart.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough, and and I think it's a respectful and courteous and considered approach is always beneficial to everybody involved. But but I think it's really important to say that, like, you wouldn't necessarily have to be Irish or have Irish ancestry to excel in an Irish tradition, which obviously you're an example of, you know. And if anything, I think there's a lot to be gained from those. When we used the term crossroads earlier, but those kind of crossroads of tradition, you know. I often find it wonderful when you see very similar practices in other lands, in other cultures. That kind of to me, that often strengthens the idea of, like, well, I get a sense of I'm on the right path, or I'm understanding this.
Yes, I agree. I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, okay,
It's
yeah,
those synchronicities, or all of a sudden you get to witness a bit of the beauty of how everything seems
hmm,
both interconnected and also highly specific to obviously the lands it comes from, right?
yeah, yeah,
And making those bridges is actually fascinating. Yeah,
hmm,
endlessly fascinating.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I kind of talk about frequently on the show is the importance of language and kind of understanding language. And I think that's a really interesting inflection, particularly being like, I'm not a native Irish speaker.
Mhm.
I've been learned Irish in school, and I'm kind of reflecting on it a lot. Particularly over the last year, I've been kind of learning Irish again. Um, so I can see that as being a slight barrier to how people in Ireland would describe the land, would describe the animals in the land. Um, but
Yes. I
it's not a fundamental thing. You know, I think it's something you can get over. But sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you there.
No, no, no. I talked over you actually. I think you're very much right, and the language is a doorway. I've been attempting to learn Irish myself.
Oh, wonderful.
I know a few bits. It seems only respectful, and I think it's a natural calling to do so, because how can you? I mean, it's tied together, isn't it?
Yes.
And so it's in natural inclination of the heart to want to do that. I will say that sadly, I'm not as proficient in that learning than I was, say, in English, which came very fast to me in a way that actually occulted every other language I ever attempted to learn. It's like my brain capacity, that's it. You can know 2 language and that's it. But, I'm still trying, and you're right, when you know more than one language, I feel it expands and opens your brain and your thought process to multiple ways of problem solve or approach situations, right? I'm at a point now where I would say I'm as proficient in English as I am in French, and it's like I hold 2 vessels in my head that outpour into each other constantly. So sometimes the French wants to come, especially during especially emotional situations, and it's the
Right.
English that comes first, and vice versa. So it's a bit funny actually. I end up speaking a sort of Franglish, I guess.
Do you know, that's a wonderful description of kind of having two languages in your head. Um, my French is probably better than my Irish, although my Irish is catching up. But I spent quite a few summers in France when I was a teenager, and doing the language exchange student thing when I was a kid. But there's just certain phrases that fit situations better. Um,
Yeah.
dep- that you're like, as an English speaker, that English doesn't have, that French has better. And equally, when you're kind of in a magical practice of some description, I found that that also works. There's certain expressions that are able to articulate, activate, and express a magical intention better in a certain language than they do in another.
Yes, I agree. I agree. There is also this notion of Well, actually, I don't know if English has the same saying, but in French there is a saying that if I had to translate it literally, is like nobody can be a prophet in their own land. And
Right.
to me, it proved rather true in that I didn't really. Okay, I guess it's hard for me to pinpoint exactly when I started to become interested in witchcraft
Hmm.
because it feels like it's always been there. I always had an interest in the numinous. It sounds so cliche to say, but it makes it difficult to pinpoint where everything all started.
Right.
But at the same time, I can definitely pinpoint it becoming serious and me being able to recognize initiations or spirit initiations for what they are when
Right.
I moved to the UK. Um, so it's like being there activated stuff, and then coming back to France, I had a newfound knowledge, I suppose, or a newfound experience that made me look at my own country, the country I was born in,
Hmm.
differently. You know.
Yeah, yeah, that really resonates. And can I just, for in a totally non-magical segue, just appreciate your your English is so good. It's just so fluent. I'm so jealous of the ability to speak another language so fluently. It's
Oh
brilliant.
my gosh,
You
thank
know,
you so much. I feel so self-conscious about it because between
you've
the
no
accents,
reason.
you
You have
know,
no reason to feel self-conscious about it whatsoever. You speak
I'm
English better than some natives, so it's as I've been kind of like studying my own native language for the last, like properly for the last year, really kind of getting into it. Uh,
mhm.
I just have a real appreciation for people speaking a language that is they haven't been born with. I just really think it's such an awesome thing to have achieved. Um, so yeah,
It's
that's a total non-magical segue. Just just an
Oh, but
appreciation.
thank you. I will accept the compliment because I think
Thank
it
you.
goes by step when you learn a language. I think the first thing is you just want to be understood, right?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
slowly you are able to express yourself in a way that is closer to your actual personality as you gain nuance, as you gain vocabulary.
Hmm.
And it takes time. It really does take time.
Hmm.
I was always told that there is two big steps. One is when you are able to crack a joke because it means that you're quick enough, in the conversation
Hmm.
to be able to react and make a pun or have a quick-witted attempt at making someone laugh.
Yeah.
And this shows that you are very much present in the conversation and you're not preparing sentences in your head,
Hmm.
and then when you're ready, sadly the conversation has already moved on, so you're
Sure.
stuck here like, oh no. And then the second step is actually dreaming in the other language, and I remember dreaming
Oh, how interesting.
in English for the first time very vividly. Actually, I felt so proud.
Oh wow, I haven't even conceptualized that. I think one of the interesting milestones for me was just um, seeing a picture of an animal and thinking of its name in Irish before I thought of it in English.
Ah, I love that. I
Yeah,
love.
which was nice. Um, yeah, yeah, I kind of really appreciated that because I think it's part of that kind of decolonization mindset of kind of like thinking
Oh,
as
yeah.
you know um, as your ancestors may have. You know, um, But anyway, we've gone off in some interesting tangents here, and we're only kind of 15 minutes in talking about language. But it's a wonderful, wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate it. So, tell us
Likewise.
about how did this journey start for you? How did you, um, you know, what were as you kind of already asserted, it's probably always been there in terms of your witchcraft and how you were drawn to it. But can you tell
Yes.
us a story of how that spark may have ignited in you?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm able now to recognize what has always been there because now I am equipped with the proper narrative tool to make sense of that. Although it's retroactively, of course, but I think like most people coming to witchcraft, magic, paganism, it started with a bunch of crap. I would say, let's say, I don't know, magical shows or like novels or, those very cheap new age books. So my journey from that perspective is no different. But at the same time, there were things that I felt closer to as a child, for instance, or as a kid, that I had no words to describe, and now I know. But it's yeah, I wasn't able to recognize it for what it was at the time. I guess when I alluded earlier that it became serious for me when I came into the UK, is that it was the first time I was able to experience and really feel that a particular land was speaking to me. It's like I recognized the landscapes and I knew they had something to teach me. And I hope it doesn't sound, self-aggrandizing or pretentious. It's just that I coming here, I found that the trees, the plants, the wildlife made sense, and it made a lot of things click. And so that's about the same time I started to really delve into, I guess, Wicca and witchcraft and folk magic, but nothing too involved. And so I approached different groups, different people who shared with me their visions of the occult. And I quickly realized that everybody has different perspective and that will have to learn my own way and to understand how to collage all this together. And then I started having dreams. Dreams that most people who have met this being would recognize as he who makes introductions, he who opens the way, the one that dwells at the crossroads, the man in black, or the folk devil. That's how it started for me.
Okay. Yeah, and what was that experience like? How did he manifest for you?
Um, I remember it was during winter, a night in January, and there was that wild wind outside. That, the kind of wind where you know that something is roaming afoot in the lawns and that you have to close your windows tight. I had experienced such things in France because obviously we have lore of the wild hunt, la chasse sauvage, as we call him. And but this particular night, as I was, falling asleep in my bed and plainly thinking about what it would take for me to become a witch. Like I was thinking about that precisely. Witchcraft, initiations. What did it mean? How could I make sense of that? And that wind was, blowing outside. And all of a sudden, I I just felt an urge, a call, or an impulse to just go outside, and I was all naked. It was nighttime. I could just see myself opening the door and going into this tempest that we were having. And I was pulled, and there I flied. And the wind was messing with my hair, and it whipped my skin, and I started to walk on this grassy hillside that I have outside my house. And it started to feel bigger and more remote than it actually is in the waking life. And slowly but surely, the landscape changed, and I found myself a bit lost. I could feel the grass under my feet, and it was wet and cold. And the ground was very icy and black, and I was progressing in the darkness without seeing anything. And so I walked, and in the middle of that field in front of my house, who grew and grew until all mark of civilization disappeared, and all was left was me, the wind, the grass, the ground, and the frozen landscape. all of a sudden in the distance there was a silhouette which appeared. And I decided to march into that direction, there in the field, in that open land that I recognized but also did not recognize. And I met a tall black figure. And this figure had a hornet skull for a head. It looked like a deer, but I think, I think it was closer to an elk. And anyway, this figure was sat towering on a throne. And all of a sudden, I recognized him. And I stayed very calm, and he spoke to me. His words only to ask me, what were you expecting? And before I even, conceptualized what I was going to answer, I had already replied, no throne. And so this figure actually stood up, came to me, embraced me, and he had very, very long fingers. And as the embrace drew to a close and his fingers and arms clasped around my body, I just woke up. And so that's how I met the man in black.
Wow, so that's extraordinary. Um,
It was
really,
such a vivid experience, but I think I can pinpoint it as the first time
right,
I actually experienced what's called spirit flight,
right.
um, because I did not realize that all those weird dreams, all those intense, vivid dream life I was having was actually that,
Right.
until I specifically met him and recognized him for who he is.
And how much has he been like involved in your witchcraft since then? Is he a tutelary spirit? Is he involved in crafting? Or, I was going to say crafting your
Yes,
witchcraft. That's a really awkward sentence, but like,
he is.
yeah,
It's an interesting question because he is actually he's always there, but he's not as present or as involved as other beings that I've come to be closely working with over the years. It's like he is supervising all this and witnessing and making the connections and facilitating some connections. For instance, he appeared close to the hawthorn tree that I'm packed to, emerging from here, and told me, you need to find the blackthorn. The blackthorn is your brother, and it will teach you. And so I, in my very rational waking life brain, I was like, I must find a hawthorn tree. And actually, he was alluding to my teacher, which I met shortly after that dream I just recounted, who is very, very much closely packed to the blackthorn tree. And when my teacher told me that, I recognized them for the teacher they would become for me because I had known beforehand that they were coming into my life. Does that make sense?
oh, it completely makes sense. Yeah. Um,
It's that kind of, you
mhm,
know, he also told me explicitly I always come when I'm called thrice. If you call me 3 times,
mhm.
the third time I will come.
Oh, that's really
But
interesting.
it's not. So yeah, he's there, and I've come to know him by many names, but it's not like
Mhm.
he's constantly present. It's like coming and going.
Yeah, no, I recognize that a lot, and sometimes I go to really intense periods of him just
Yes.
constantly speaking to me, and basically getting what he wants,
Yes.
whatever it is that I have to do, and then kind of uh, vanishing. Um, for periods of time, which has presented challenges at times. Some challenges where like sometimes it comes really easy, and then it doesn't. Then it's gone, and then I
I
found kind of with
recommend.
my own um areas of say strength and weaknesses, or areas where I don't have experience, because a lot of this stuff has just happened, you know. That
Yes, yes, very much so.
yeah,
And sometimes you're in, you're down a completely different path, and all of a
yeah.
sudden there is a sign between you and him that makes you realize, well, hello there. I'm still here. I'm still watching.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very challenging path. What I found is it seems to be in some aspects task orientated, that you have a particular thing to do, to fulfill. Have you found that?
Yes, very much so. I think in his capacities of opener of ways and great initiator, he comes with, a role as a mediator, and it comes with dropping something on your lap, like, this is what you need to take care of.
Yeah, I've definitely found that. Um, that's a, it's a very strange experience, um, particularly when you kind of well, it brings into question our concepts of things like free will. Um,
Yes.
there's certain things that I feel kind of like, well, if I don't do this, it's not going to work out well for me. Not necessarily that like I'll be punished as aware, but more kind of like I kind of have to do this. There's a compulsion. It's coming from him, and if I don't do it, I'm probably going to go a bit crazy.
Mhm. Yes, and alternatively, sometimes it's in doing the thing that you become a bit crazy. So, yeah, it's,
Oh, that's so well put. That's
I mean, it's a
yeah.
constant balance, isn't it? I feel as occultist and magical practitioner,
Mhm,
we have to hang tight to our humanity.
mhm,
We have to value it. We have to surround ourselves with people who are grounded in the mundane.
mm, mm,
I don't have many occultist friends in my daily life, I would
yeah,
say offline, because I recognize within myself the capacity to get carried away, and
yeah,
I want to hang on to my humanity very seriously. I'm committed to live a fulfilling life, and the occult is very much something that disturbs a life. So striking a balance and negotiating those terms with your spirit court is
yeah,
constant game.
yeah. That's so well put. I really agree with that. It really resonates with me. Um, yeah.
Also,
Um,
because you find yourself negotiating part of your soul in the process, depending on which initiation you carry on or
mhm,
which spirit you get involved with.
yeah,
Um, it has a cost. It's part of your sanity, of course, but also just your capacity to live in the shared reality and shared world with others.
mhm,
So yeah, hanging on tight to what makes us human and, just basic human beings is something we need to cultivate.
mm.
And occultists as a whole could do a better job at doing that. No shade.
No, I think that's a totally reasonable thing to say. You know, like as a whole, as a cultural group, we're very good at disagreeing with each other and pointing out where each other are incorrect. You know, quite fervently and quite resolutely. We're not very good at introspection. You know, you don't see a lot of introspection. Um, you
I
know,
think, yeah,
sorry.
we are a bunch of people with a lot of ego. So when you put too much of us in the same room, it rarely ends up well. But I think yes, we could probably do a better job. And I say that as someone who has been guilty in the past of not acting always as gracefully and from a place of kindness as I
Mhm,
could or should have,
mhm.
but doing a better job at cultivating compassion. Sometimes I see such a lot of contempt for, beginners or purely people who do not practice any kind of magic at
Mm,
all,
mm.
and it scares me a bit. Honestly, it scares me.
I understand that completely. Um, the It's like you don't have to be. Um,
So edgy all the time.
it's to be honest with
Just
you,
cut grass.
it's tedious in a lot of ways. People can still behave in a way that's respectful. Um, but I also think that a lot of it is wildly exacerbated by shitty internet culture and clout chasing and scandal chasing. There's a certain amount of kind of ambulance chasing that goes on in internet culture that's just
Yes.
crass and vulgar, and people need to get beyond really. But anyway, moving on from my quintessential dig at social media. Um,
I'll follow you on that.
I'm really interested to hear kind of like what does your practice look like in kind of your everyday life, and how to what are the kind of the kind of fundamentals that are part of your daily practice.
Hmm. I'm really simple, you see. I touch base with my spirits every day. Um, it's For the longest time, I actually felt like I had to separate my mundane life and my magical life, but actually, finding proper balance is about having those two aspects in a harmonious way. So I wake up, I go to the altar, I say hi, I make a freshly batch of blessed water. I may say a prayer or two. I pick whatever fancy talismanic jewelry I want to wear that day, or any oils, anything. And then I just go to work, you know. Coming home, I touch base again. And during the day, I'm never far from what makes myself other, I suppose, a witch or non-human, partly non-human. And at the same time, I'm just like anybody else. I'm nothing special. So on the daily, I'm a manager, I'm a witch, I'm a friend, I'm a lover, I'm just like anybody else. Is there any particular aspect that you would like us to discuss when you say practice, or I mean,
Yeah, I think I mean, we can get into the kind of the complexities of like what your daily rituals are, or that kind of thing. But I think really, I think you've touched on something there that's more interesting. I think more relevant to people listening to to the show when you talk about the different aspects of who you are as a human being. Like
mhm,
being a witch is one part of it. It obviously has a dramatic influence over how the rest of you, you know, integrates and interacts with those around you. Um, Sometimes that's a real hard balancing act.
yeah,
Um, uh,
sometimes you feel like you're an acrobat
yeah,
walking
yeah,
on a tightrope.
totally, totally. I mean, I don't know about you. Sometimes I find like just the kind of the practicalities of life can be really really challenging to not necessarily manage, but just kind of to be in.
Mhm,
Because we as kind of these type of practitioners spend a lot. Well, I say I'm speaking wildly generally. I speaking for
yeah.
myself. Um, I find it sometimes that I'm floating around in a totally different world,
Mhm.
and sometimes it's hard to kind of get back into the more kind of practical side of things at times.
Yes, I agree, I agree. I'm not very good. I've got an amazing partner who is so good at bringing me back, and I value that immensely. If I were living with other occultists, I have no idea how I would be able to find my balance. Telling you that right now. But yeah, I see what you mean when you say sometimes you get carried away and it's hard to come back. Very much so.
My partner has zero tolerance for my quote unquote bullshit. She keeps my feet firmly on the ground. No, no problem there.
My partner is regularly like, so you know that expensive bottle of whiskey that we had? How come did the gods and spirits drink half of it? Yeah? Okay.
Well, they've got good taste. They may have. They may have drunk.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Excellent.
then, we find ourselves in the supermarket and I buy some fancy honey, local, raw produce, whatever, and it's like,
Mhm.
I guess I'm never tasting that, am I? That's for the gods and ungods, right? Right.
So on your Instagram, you've got a variance of posts about Joan of Arc, which
Yeah.
I'd really be interested in you kind of telling us a little bit about your thoughts on this famous French heroine.
Sure, with pleasure. As a French person, I think that Joan of Arc or Jeanne d'Arc is is a figure that you're very aware of. It's part of your culture, of your history, right? But at the same time, I feel that her narrative in the details isn't so very well known, or certainly the way I was taught about her or what I knew of before I actually started to develop a relationship with her was very there was a lot of misnomer. First of all, I thought she was burned as a witch, which is not the case. And I think it's a narrative that is quite prevalent in France. A lot of people, if you mention Joan of Arc, will tell you, yeah, she heard voices and was burned for it, basically. And so there is a lot of her personal story that I was completely and vastly unfamiliar with until she started to show me. And I mean by that, as you alluded to, probably the last article I wrote, which is Joan of Arc as a fairy saint, because she has tied with like profound ties with French fairy lore in a way that I did not suspect. And it's one of those spirit intuited and spirit led research that I then found back in books, and it blew my mind.
And can you tell us a little bit about um, those kind of crossovers with French fairy lore?
Yes. So everybody knows the story of Joan of Arc, the humble peasant girl from Lorraine who took up arms against the English, pledged allegiance to a king, and secured crucial victory on the battlefield. But all know, of course, how she died, and how it was such a tragic story because she died so young and she had a life that was very, very much blazing. And at the same time, where did those voices come from? Is the question that started to really interest me. I couldn't really tell you where that was coming from, but I had that intuition or that nudging, that pull, that started to really take root and then blossom. What if Joan actually saw fairies? And it's hard for me to pinpoint where this idea came from initially because Joan is undeniably a Catholic saint. And yet, learning about the beginnings for her, I realized that she participated in certain rituals, should we say, that are very much linked to a atavistic fairy faith or fairy cultus that was more than likely present in France before the Christian overlay. In the trial, she's explicitly interrogated about her dealings with fairy beings, whether or not she was able to recognize them for who they were, if she actively cultivated relationship. And that's something she always denied in her explicit discourse. And at the same time, she was saying things that were very troubling, such as she was not explicitly condemning fairies as being wrong or evil, which is a very fatal mistake and a death warrant, actually. So the church had a long list of charges brought against Joan, but in my opinion, those questions about her dealings with fairies are extremely interesting. You see, she had her visions close to a fairy tree, and she knew it was a fairy tree. It was next to a healing well, as is often the case, and there is a lot of other elements in her story that are puzzling and troubling, such as the fact that her coming was prophesied. So yeah, there is a lot of lots of bits and bobs in the story of Joan that do not always fit the bill of a Catholic saint, strictly from the Abrahamic faith. And it's in those little bits that leave room for interpretation and for other religions, I suppose, to insert themselves that I found a calling to Joan and where she actually brought me.
That's so interesting. I had no idea of those details about the fairy tree. I knew that she had heard voices, but I had no idea around those specific details. And when you think about, say, some of the like the militaristic inspiration that came to Joan, how she managed to capture the imagination of, you know, uh, uh, the army, the French army of and or military forces, whatever the correct
Yeah.
term is. Um, like for a young woman to do that in that time is so strange and out of sync with the culture of that time. Um,
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah, it's extraordinary, really. Um, I
It
mean, just
probably wasn't as linear as what we'd like to think. It's not like
right.
she had immediate resources and support,
Hmm.
but the fact is, she managed to have them, in the end.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's absolutely incredible. And that's, I believe, what really sets her apart as a figure, because there were so many odds against her and she still did it.
It, I'm interested to get your thoughts on this angle of things, but if we're looking at like country, if we're looking at landscape and the relationship between the people of the land
Hmm.
um, against like an invading army,
Yes.
as the English were, is this a spiritual reaction of the landscape to that invading force?
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because you may or may not know this, but Joan actually was born in Lorraine, as I said, which is a territory that is culturally and historically very much disputed between France and Germany.
Okay.
And her voices told her to go to France. And here we have an interesting implication because it seems to be saying that actually she was not in France, right? So, what were those voices saying? Do you need, Joan, do you need to go to the siege of France, to go to what represents France, to your king, or do you need to go to the land specifically? And so, where do you yourself live, right? Because although she's very much a French figure now, and a French, she's one of the patron saints of France. The territory, the very land she comes from, is just like her, in fact, a bit liminal and in between.
And this is Alsace-Lorraine, isn't it? It's just
Yes.
between Germany and France, that
Yeah.
contested
Yeah.
area. Yeah. Yeah. That's it's a really interesting. We can never pin this stuff down, can we? Whenever we try and kind of understand it in human terms, it always squirms out from under that fork. And
Well, I guess it circles back to what you were saying earlier in the conversation, that, the boundaries and the borders that we as human beings
mhm,
try to apply to the land, to the territory, or even to ourselves.
yeah,
Am I French? Am I English? Am I Irish? They don't always make sense in the subtle worlds. In
mm,
fact,
mm,
they rarely make sense in the subtle worlds. And Joan didn't sit here questioning her legitimacy, or, oh, am I French enough to do that? She just went. She,
yeah,
like, the voices told her, go to France, and she went. She knew she had a calling, and she acted upon it. And in that, she's a big inspiration. But for me, as someone who is studying her lore, for instance, I can't just look at French fairy folklore. I need
yeah,
to look also at Germanic folklore and Germanic fairy lore to understand what was going on in the land that she comes from, and see. And in fact, I myself come from a region that wasn't French until, oh gosh, I'm going to show my ignorance here, but let's just say that it was very late. It's I come from a territory that's in between northern Italy, southern Switzerland, and eastern France, right in the
right,
Alps. And so historically, I'm not sure you could say that my ancestors were French.
mhm,
They were very much from the same region, but yeah, those borders, those boundaries, they fluctuate, and there is a lot of common ground in the territory that Joan is from and where I'm from,
okay,
because it was about mountains, it was about hillsides, it was about that whole territory that stretches from, yeah, Germany up until northern Italy. So yeah, how far back do you want to come back to find lore that is relevant to this story?
right.
There's a lot to pass through.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Uh, no, thank you for taking us through that. I really found that intriguing. Um, it, it's such an interesting idea of like the how, how the land in some shape can possess somebody to articulate its sovereignty. Um, Anyway,
Yes,
interesting stuff. Um,
it
so
is. And you know what? I think Joan actually shows up. I mean, if we want to add on to that, I can tell you very explicitly that my work with Joan started to really take roots when I sort of made peace with the fact that I was living in the UK and not knowing when or if I would ever go back to live in the country that born me.
mhm,
So the longer I stay in the UK, the more I grow roots, right? The more I am off this place because I
yeah,
live here, I work with, I speak the language. And the further estranged I actually become from where I was born. And it comes with its own kind of sadness,
yes, it
also,
does.
because then you come back to those familiar landscapes and you realize, well, I'm less connected to you now. I don't live here on the daily anymore, and so there is so much I miss. I'm building a life somewhere else. And so this is about that time that Joan showed up for me. And discussing with other friends that have, cultivated a relationship with Joan for longer than I have, I realized that it's actually that there is a pattern here. That Joan actually shows up when questions of, so of course, French fairy resurgence and fairy reliance are concerned, but also just more broadly with questions of the land's sovereignty and emerging from the landscape and the territory to tell you something about the power of it. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense for me that Joan showed up at that time of my life now, even though she was always part of the landscape and figure I was personally interested in. So again, she comes as a bridge. In my case, bridging France and English lands. It's calling for a reconciliation, I say, of two, multiple countries and multiple faiths also.
Yeah,
Have I just rambled, or does it make sense?
It does make total sense.
Sorry, I don't want to be monologuing at you.
Not at all. It's genuinely impossible to ramble on this show. Nobody can sound more incoherent than me, so crack on. So in terms of how I guess Joan became more important to you when you are I guess living apart from your homeland,
Mhm.
and I totally get that. There's certain things that I never appreciated when I was home, when I was back in Ireland. I didn't appreciate, or I might have found them a little bit naff, but
Yeah,
you know, um,
because it's so familiar.
it's so familiar, and that familiarity breeds contempt. But when you're away from it, it becomes special, and all of a sudden you actually appreciate it a lot more. And it's
Yeah.
quite a thing, thing for immigrants across the world to feel that. Um, but
Yes, and it's something that's so difficult to articulate
it
in
really is,
language and
yeah.
to communicate to others as well. I
Hmm.
feel only as an expat can you really, or an immigrant, can you understand what's at stake here.
Hmm.
And I appreciate how privileged I am because it's always been a choice for me.
Hmm.
I've not been brought to leave my country and my homeland because of war or any other
Yeah,
terrible
yeah.
things. It comes me being from a country and coming to another comes from a place of privilege, and I want to be very clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
I came here for work, and it's a luxury.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, thank you so much
Uh,
for inviting me,
uh,
and it's been great meeting you properly
mm,
and being on the show. Thank you.
you're so welcome. And for people who want to find out more about you or more about your work, where's the best place for them to do so?
On my website, so it's greenchapel.com, green with a E at the end, so Green
Mm.
Chapel all together. That's my website. You can also read my latest writings here and access my offerings, my services. That would be the best place to go.
Lovely, lovely. Um, okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been fantastic to catch up with you.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the episode.
My, my pleasure. Thank you very much, Briar. I hope you all enjoyed that. If you want to find out more about Briar's work, then do check out the show notes. And I'm going to leave it there. I'm Darren Mason, and you've been listening to the Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon. Bye.